All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us from wherever in the world you may find yourself today. We have an exciting topic today about One Health being presented by our very own Emily Hirata. As a little bit of an introduction, as people across the world become more connected to each other, we also become more connected with the animals and environments around us. We've seen with recent infectious diseases such as Ebola, Zika, and avian flu, all diseases that find their origin in animals, that the health of our own human population is closely linked to the health of other creatures and the environments they can be found in. The One Health approach is an emerging movement that looks at how humans, animals, and environments are linked and what that means for global health. In this webinar, we will unpack what One Health is, why it matters, and what this movement means for organizations like Adra. The webinar will be conducted by our very own Emily Hirata. Emily graduated with her Master's in Public Health from Loma Linda University's School of Public Health and currently works with Adra International's Program Technical Unit. Her experience before Adra included work in international development and public health in the Philippines, Marshall Islands, Rwanda, and several locations in the US. And with that, Emily, I think I'll hand it over to you to fill us in a little bit more on what One Health is and how it affects our work with ADRA. It's all yours.
Thanks, Deborah. You can hear me okay, I hope?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, we can.
perfect. And you can see my screen okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Alrighty. So I'd like to just second Deborah's thanks for everyone being here today. And it's really exciting for me because I'm usually on the back end of these webinars, getting things coordinated and all that, but today I get to present. So that's really special and exciting for me. And it's on a topic that I'm really interested in. And so I'm really glad that I can share this with you. And that topic is, as Deborah stated, an introduction to global health at the human-animal ecosystem interface. Okay, so Deborah gave a little introduction for me already. I just wanted to put this slide in here so you knew a little bit about who was talking to you. If you want to reach out to me later on, my email is up there. If you have any questions after the fact that aren't able to be answered in the Q&A. But I am the Programs Network Technical Assistant. I work closely with our Program Development Advisory Committee, or also known as PDAC, as well as our Technical Learning Labs. And I'm actually presenting this on behalf of the Health Technical Learning Lab, of which I'm a member. And so with that, I'm going to get started. And before we dive in, I just want to give a little quick overview of what we're going to cover today. It'll be broken down into three main sections. So what is One Health, why One Health, and what does One Health mean for ADRA? And so for the first point, we'll unpack some background and see what One Health is really made up of. For the second, we'll look at the rationale of why One Health and why it's so important and shouldn't be ignored. And for the third, we'll bring it all back around and see where ADRA can fit into the One Health space. And so just as a disclaimer, though, this webinar will be a little bit more academic in nature than some of our other webinars. Several of our webinars have been more practical, and I'm going to try to tie the practical side in at the very end, but the majority of this will be more informational, a little bit more academic at the beginning, just so we can get that background that we need, that introduction that we need to fully understand One Health. So, what is One Health? This is actually an old concept, and it dates as far back as maybe 400 BC or around there. But it's only recently that this idea has really started to gain momentum. And it was the term One Medicine has been coined by a veterinarian in a book in 1984. And this one medicine idea came from the fact that this man who was named Dr. Calvin Schwab, he thought that the idea that veterinarians were only limited to animal life and well-being was not the right mindset, and that veterinary activities could actually promote human health as well. So this is the mindset. This take on health and medicine is where we get the One Health movement that we have today, that term that we now use. It's not a new discipline, it's not a new sector, but it's a new perspective or a new approach toward the current health disciplines that we use and we practice in today. So the general term we've been using in international development in regards to health has been global health. And that constitutes mainly a focus on human health. But there really are other fields that also deal with health. And we know that as veterinary health, which is about animals, keeps animals in the main focus, as well as environmental health or ecosystem health. I'll be using ecosystem and environment sort of interchangeably in this webinar, but there's health of that as well. So, for the people, we have things like medicine and public health, nutrition, animals, maybe livestock care or wildlife welfare. And for the environment, things like conservation or plant pathology, really focusing on the natural world. But in our industry, when we refer to global health, the main focus of global health has been and still is more or less the human side, the human focus. And it rarely brings in a focus on the animal or the ecosystem side of the spectrum to the same degree. There are certainly organizations that focus mainly on animals or the planet, but they don't fall within the category of global health. But with the One Health approach to global health, we really look at all three of these fields of health together as one. They're more equal, and so that's sort of the basis of what One Health is. It's looking at the people, the animals, and our natural environment all together because they are all health, and so it's all One Health. So another way of putting it, it's transdisciplinary. This image up here it kind of shows a spectrum of how to categorize disciplines. So we're familiar with the term silos. We like to use that term in the industry. We talk about like, oh, we don't want to operate in silos. We need to be more integrated. So we have silos down at the bottom, and at the very top on the other side of the spectrum is transdisciplinary, a more higher level synthesis. Everything is sort of all one, and that's really what One Health is. It's the intersection of the approaches that we have currently siloed out as the human sector, the animal sector, and the environment sector. It's not siloed with One Health, it's more transdisciplinary. So I like this slide. I just put these pictures together. This is sort of how I think of One Health in my mind. It's animals, humans, and environment all together as one. Humans are just a component of the greater picture, bigger picture of health. And one does not take precedence over the other. It's all, it comes together as one field. Everything is connected. Animals and environment are connected to us, and we're connected to the other's health. So this is a sort of it gives us a visual of what I mean by One Health and combining the sectors or those silos of health. We see the human health, animal health, and environment environmental health. And in the middle is that sweet spot, the One Health, where they all intersect all together. And this graph is more, so the graph on the left is similar to the one in the previous slide. And the one on the right is really what I think constitutes One Health. So it's more looking at the three of these sectors all together. They're more related than not, and they operate more in the same space than not. So they're not siloed fields. They operate all together in reality. So that's really One Health. It's just the combining of the traditional veterinary, human, and environment health sectors. It's just all one field, one major field, and they all operate together and influence each other. So now we're going to shift gears a little bit, as that was just some of the background. So now I'm going to get a little bit more into some examples, maybe some statistics to show why this is important and why this should be on our radar. And just as a side note, there are countless examples that we could define as One Health issues that can provide a rationale of why we need to be paying attention to this and have One Health programming. But I'm just going to talk about just a few today for time's sake. And if there are questions, we can talk about that afterward, or we can have separate webinars on additional examples and issues. But for now, we're just going to talk about 4 reasons why One Health. So the first one is the increase of zoonotic diseases, or other words known as zoonoses. Some people say zoonoses, same thing. Basically what these are diseases that can be transmitted from humans to animals. So, or transmitted to humans from animals, rather. And this can be from pets, from livestock, from wildlife, really from any animal. And as most of us know, not all diseases that animals have can be transmitted to us or go back and forth. For instance, I have 2 pets of my own, 2 cats, and when they are sick, I do not usually think of the potential of me getting sick from them. That usually doesn't happen. When I'm sick, they don't get sick because I've been sick. But it's a really interesting thing, and we'll see in the next slide, that there are more diseases than not that actually come from animals. And this is actually a concern we need to have. So over 60% of the infectious diseases we see in humans, so overall, over 60% of those are of animal origin. And these statistics come from the WHO. And with saying that, over 75% of emerging or new diseases that we see affecting humans today come from animals. So I want you to just think about that for a minute. Over half of the diseases that we see in humans today originate from, or infectious diseases rather, and originate from animals. Over half of those. That's a really large number, and 3/4 of all of the new diseases that we see emerging as time goes on come not from other people, but from the animals around us. So just from these statistics alone, we can see that it's extremely important that we be paying attention to the health of animals around us. Again, be that pets, livestock, animals used for protection or work, as well as even paying attention to the health of wildlife. Because we'll see in a moment that even if we're not in direct contact with wildlife, that can make a difference for our health and for our lives. So the diseases on this slide are some of the more common zoonotic diseases that most people have at least heard of. They're not just rare diseases that infect small portions of populations. Some are, but some of them are quite devastating, like we've seen with HIV, Ebola, Zika. And the potential can be extremely costly in more ways than one to individual communities, national health systems, and even regional or global operations. And those costs, the impacts are on livestock production. These are just some examples that can be severely impacted. Livestock production, food security, livelihoods, even things like tourism and trade, travel, conservation efforts, and even education and biosecurity. So it's a pretty big deal. So I put this slide in here just because, you know, we have the question, of course, of, well, how do these diseases actually transmit from animals to humans? And basically, they're transmitted the same way as diseases or infections are transmitted from humans to other humans. It can be airborne through vectors such as mosquitoes or ticks, through direct contact with an animal that's infected, through close proximity, through things such as like fecal oral transfer or body fluids, but also it can be from consumption of infected meat or milk. So focusing on the health of the animal sources may actually be much more cost effective and life-saving, because we see that many of these illnesses start within the animals rather than within people. And so the whole cost-effective thing, this graph shows sort of the timeline of how zoonoses evolved from animals to humans and the costs that result from that. And it's much more effective in preventing high healthcare costs and outbreak control costs by focusing on the health of animals, by tackling the issue where it originates before it gets to really big problems in humans. And so this can prevent even unnecessary suffering and death for people. So it's really important that we be paying attention to animal health in the light of thinking of human health, but bringing in a focus of animal health as well. Okay, so that was rationale number one, the increase of zoonotic diseases. And rationale number two of why this is important is antimicrobial resistance. Now, there are different kinds of antimicrobials. We have antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitics, and antifungals. And you can see here on this slide what those are for: bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi. These are all different types of antimicrobial resistance, and antimicrobials are very, very important to human health. At the beginning of last century, if you got a bloodstream infection, your chances of dying were about 90%. So very, very grim. But now, due to penicillin, that's changed to about 10% of 10% chance of dying. So that's a big impact that antimicrobials have had for modern medicine, and that it can help for things like cancer treatments, joint replacements, surgeries, and even treatments for things like HIV and diabetes. So it's very, very important. But what we're starting to see is that there has been resistance to these antimicrobials, that the infections that we're getting are not being taken care of by these antimicrobials anymore. And that's due to improper use in both humans and animals. That leads to antimicrobial resistance. And this can be in both the animal sector, such as using antimicrobials inappropriately for a substitute for poor hygiene, but also within humans, there's very highly unregulated use of antimicrobials in many places. People can get them over the counter sometimes without a prescription, or sometimes people will not take their antibiotics, for instance, for the full term that they've been prescribed. Or they'll take it for the wrong thing, such as they'll take an antibiotic, which is for bacteria, to try to treat something like a virus or a headache, which it won't work. And so the resistance builds up in your system. And so you see the antimicrobial resistance, and it can just lead to greater and greater issues. And the O'Neill review on antimicrobial resistance report from 2016, which is what this graph comes from, this image, it says that currently about 700,000 deaths occur every year due to antimicrobial resistance in illnesses. And that's a low estimate. These are very underreported, is what our health community, the global community suspects. But they've made the prediction that if we continue at the same rate of improper use of antimicrobials in both animals and humans, that by the year 2050, 10 million people each year will die from antimicrobial resistance in illnesses. And that's a huge concern, because that year will be coming up on us quicker than we think. And it just speaks loudly of our needing to do something about this now, before it gets to that level. So how does it happen? When pathogens like bacteria or viruses are persistently exposed to antimicrobials due to the overuse or misuse of them, they eventually begin to develop the resistance to those drugs that are meant to stop them. And so this graph or image here shows just how connected this is of an issue with animals and with humans. The animals can have the resistant bacteria and spread it to humans and spread it to other animals. But also humans can have it and spread it to other humans as well, and even spread it to animals. And so it can just become a bigger and bigger problem if some intervention doesn't happen. Okay, so rationale number 3 is climate change. And climate change has been described as the most important challenge facing humanity in the 21st century. A number of studies show that the anticipated consequences of climate change and environmental change seem to be occurring at a faster rate than we've expected. So that really speaks to the urgency of the matter. So in this image here, you can see all of the things at the top that climate change can exacerbate or make worse. And that's civil conflict, storms and flooding, disease transmission, heat, air pollutants, and food supply. And those things in turn can lead to greater risk of displacement, infectious disease, respiratory disease, malnutrition, all of which can eventually lead to illness, injury, and or death if things aren't mitigated. So these are just a few examples of how climate change has affected animal populations, humans, and the environment. There are things such as it alters the distribution of a wide range of diseases, and there's the example of Arctic, the white-tailed deer and elk, which they don't normally expand very super far north into the Arctic, but they have been now because things have been warmer. And so as their ranges expand northwards, they're coming into contact with muskox and caribou, and are giving new pathogens, new diseases to the muskox and caribou, and it's killing them off. We also have the example of harmful algal blooms or toxic algae in water bodies. So down at the bottom right photo, you can see the red in the water. That's algae, toxic algae. That's been it's been an issue in Florida, and it happens every year, but every year it gets worse and worse and worse due to rising temperatures in the water. And these are toxic algae. They are harmful to marine life, such as like manatees and sea turtles, but are also harmful to humans as they are toxic, and they can even get into shellfish, which humans can eat and then be affected by the toxins that way as well. So there's a lot of complexity with climate change, but the one thing is clear is that it's definitely a One Health issue, and there needs to be a transdisciplinary approach to tackling it. Okay, so now we have forest alteration, and forest clearing or fragmentation that can take place for a number of different reasons, such as logging or making space for agriculture use, or just simply expanding urbanization by building towns and cities or even roads that go through the forest. And this not only affects the immediate environment, such as the trees themselves, but really can actually have a chain effect on humans and the well-being of the entire area as well. So in this image here, forest alteration, or in this case deforestation, can lead to a number of different health impacts for not just people, but for animals as well. There's ecosystem degradation, things like air pollution, but also it can lead to natural disasters, a greater risk from natural disasters, and even disruption of cultural and spiritual connection with the forest, which can be harmful to mental health. So there's a wide range of problems that can come from something as simple as deforestation, which we normally don't think of in terms of health impact, but it can have a huge impact. So forest alteration can also increase diseases in humans, infectious diseases in humans, such as zoonoses as well. And this, one of the most well-studied diseases in regards to forest alteration is yellow fever. And naturally, this virus, the yellow fever virus, is maintained within monkey populations, and it's transmitted between monkeys by mosquitoes. But with the expansion into the forest by human settlements, we've seen frequent outbreaks in humans. And when the transmission cycle leaves the forest canopy, as in, humans are traveling outside of that forest canopy, the disease goes with them and is transmitted then from human to human by mosquitoes in urban areas. And that's when we start to see large epidemics of yellow fever. And yellow fever is not the only one, but this is just a good example of this and how forest alteration can impact infectious disease as well. So we see that really this is a complex system, and it's not just about the forest and the forest's ecosystems alone, but really it spills over and affects humans and animals as well. Okay, so those were some of the rationales for carrying a One Health perspective in health programming. And now we're going to move to the last section of this webinar. And since this is an Adra webinar, I wanted to briefly address how Adra fits into the One Health space and try to answer the question of whether or not there actually is a place for an organization such as ours to operate with a One Health perspective in our programming. So to start, there's the issue of bilateral and multilateral organization. their recognition of One Health. So here we have USAID, FAO, WHO, OIE, which is the World Organization for Animal Health, and we also have the World Bank. So to begin on the left side, for USAID, Adra has been and is operating a number of USAID programs, and this is an agency we're quite familiar with and is where Adra gets a large amount of funding for programs every year. So it's an entity we're certainly concerned with, and we pay attention to it. And the question is whether or not USAID recognizes the importance of One Health, and really the short answer is yes. They have something called the Emerging Pandemic Threats Program, which is all about strengthening capacities in low-income countries to prevent, to detect, and to control infectious diseases in animals and people. And within this program, they have four different complementary projects, as you can see listed out here: the Predict Project, Prevent Project, Identify Project, and Respond Project. And these range from a focus on detecting zoonotic diseases to focusing on risks associated with disease transmission between animals and people, to workforce training for outbreak response capacity. USAID also has the One Health workforce, which trains the current and future workforce across sectors, so those sectors being human health, animal health, and environmental health, and also across disciplines, so medicine or agriculture, ecology. USAID also has the Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance, or otherwise known as OFDA, and ADRA implements OFDA projects every year for responding to disasters, and they recently came out with some new guidelines. And what's notable about this is that they actually encourage One Health approaches. So for those of you who are familiar with OFDA guidelines or need to follow them, you can actually find the One Health mentions on page 93. But this all goes to show that there certainly is a space for One Health in our industry here, because we're already seeing it in major donors like USAID. And USAID is just one example. I only mention that one only here because that's what I'm most familiar with here in the US, but there are other government major donors as well that also have a focus, have recognized the importance of One Health. Jumping to the middle, we have the FAO, OIE, and WHO collaboration, or it's also known as a tripartite collaboration. And ADRA is really familiar with these entities. We almost consider them global authorities in many instances in the sectors and subsectors of which we work. And they have set a strategic direction to take together a long-term international collaboration aimed specifically at coordinating global activities to address health risks at the human-animal ecosystem interface. So in other words, they've committed long-term to taking a One Health approach in their work. And lastly, we have the World Bank, which has recently created, just this year, I believe, a One Health operational framework, which provides strong orientation to One Health to assist users, potentially such as ADRA, in understanding and implementing One Health, and provides not only rationale for it, but also concrete guidance for its application. So what about NGOs? There are a number of NGOs intentionally operating in the One Health space, but notice here that there aren't too many organizations like ours up there. The big players like World Vision, Save the Children, Oxfam, they aren't up there. The big faith-based institutions, again, such as World Vision, aren't up here either. Now, this might be a reason for us not to jump into this space, but it also might mean the exact opposite. So simply put, we can gain grounding in this space and become known in One Health before they do, which can help us grow our visibility and our branding and make us known, make us more well known in the health sphere. And these NGOs up here could also act as new partners, which could help us enter into the space, as well as we would be helping them as well, because not all of them have the reach that our global Adra network has. So one last thing I want to mention about the industry is the education institutions that have recognized the importance of One Health and are providing their students education with this perspective. So up here on the screen, there are just a few. These are just a few of the universities across the globe that are operating in the One Health space. Many of them have actual degrees, others just some certificates, but it's been very clear that it's the One Health approach, the One Health perspective is growing within our educational institutions, and it's only a matter of time before this emphasis will be a standard field within certain departments such as schools of public health and veterinary medicine. So what does this mean for ADRA? Well, two things basically. One, university research institutions, potentially some of who are our own partners, will increasingly be holding a One Health perspective. And two, our next generation of ADRA technical staff will be carrying this One Health perspective. So if we don't keep up with the trends on our side, we might be missing out on research partnerships or the interest of excellent technical staff for other organizations that have been more open to moving into this space. So this past June, I attended the 5th International One Health Congress, which took place in Saskatoon, Canada. And this Congress happens every 2 years, and it's where all of the top One Health people go to discuss this movement. And because the One Health approach has been increasingly gaining traction, I thought it would be important for ADRA to start being part of the conversation, since we're clearly part of the health conversation. We work in health sectors, so it would be important for us to be part of these conversations and circles. And when I got there, as far as I could tell, there were no other international development or relief organizations or faith-based organizations, FBOs, similar to ADRA there. There were over 800 participants from over 60 countries present at the Congress, so lots of diversity, lots of presence, but yet very few, if any, were from organizations like ours. And so the presence was mostly from like scientists, researchers, government or UN officials, and then students, physicians, or veterinarians. But yeah, in implementing organizations and faith-based institutions like ours were largely missing. And this spoke loudly to me that there's an important gap here that needs to be filled, and we can be part of that. We're very important to the health space in general, and we also do work with animals and have environmental focus in some of our programs as well. And so there's a gap that we can help fill, because there are no other organizations like our kind in the spaces where One Health conversations really take place. So I slightly hinted at it in the last slide, but I'll say it more matter-of-factly here. Although we work within the health sector, we currently are not in the One Health space. So we're in the health sector, but not the One Health space. And we certainly have some good experience in sectors that can fall under One Health, but we're not intentional about it yet about the full integration of the three major fields of human health, animal health, and ecosystem health as one focus under health in general. But with that said, I do want to highlight several of our projects which show that we certainly have the potential for this. And just a disclaimer, I gathered these from our network projects dashboard on eNet. So I don't have firsthand involvement with these projects, and there wasn't a whole lot of information up there about these. But just from that scan alone, it does show that we have the potential. So for human health in Vietnam, there's a WASH project, and in the project proposal's rationale, it stated that 100% of the local water sources were infected with harmful agents to both people and animals, and cattle were mostly sheltered near these people's homes. And so both of these facts show that focus on animals and on the environment are integral in improving the health of humans. So by considering how humans can get sick from the cattle or from the natural water sources around them speaks clearly of a One Health matter. For the middle project, we have a resilience project focusing on reducing the mortality rate of guinea fowl. And really the main purpose of this project is about increasing the resiliency of farmers, but it still does have to do with animal health. The proposal for the project states that the causes of the guinea fowl deaths are largely pathological and environmental. And so taking those causes and focusing on that shows that the health of these animals clearly doesn't have to do with the birds alone, but rather it's an environmental issue. And not only does the environment affect the health of those birds, but the health of the birds can affect the resiliency of the farmers. So you can see how there's clear relation between the three One Health sectors. For environmental health, Uganda has an ongoing climate change project, which is about protecting the natural resources and shared environment. And it says that it will reduce negative effects of poor access for people, such as sexual and gender-based violence, and it will increase food production and can even help reduce air pollution when cooking. And so all three of these items have huge health impacts. So we have the experience, we have the potential, and now we just need to be intentional about really connecting these and reporting the results as such. So that's kind of where I would like to leave things today, just as a brief overview of One Health. And as an ender to this section, I'd like to read this quote made by the 2017 American Public Health Association's policy statement on One Health. And it says that the pursuit of understanding human, veterinary, and environmental health issues separately leads to an incomplete understanding of disease risks and therefore missed opportunities for mitigating and adapting to these problems. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for the attention that they've given, and we'll try to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really interesting and informative. I feel like you've made a very good case for for One Health and why it's important not only to us as human beings, but also to Adra. Just a quick reminder to everyone, if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand. I know that there are lots of thoughts running through my head. So in order to kick off the question and answer session, Emily, I wanted to ask you, you showed the slide with the continuum of different disciplinary interactions from silos up through transdisciplinary interaction, which is what you identified One Health as being. I'm wondering, we already struggle with trying to keep our work out of silos and into interactions. And I'm wondering if you have any kinds of suggestions or tips or any guidance for us moving forward, how we can sort of blur those lines between the silos and to make our work in general, but specifically in One Health, much more transdisciplinary.
Yeah, that's a really good question. My quick answer is I'm not sure. I think that's difficult for most people to answer, which is why it's such a problem in the industry in general. Um, but I think really just taking a focus, like changing our mindset, at least when it comes to health, changing our mindset that we have these specific health sectors such as human health, environment health, animal health, changing that mindset and making it more like it's all one health. How do we measure that? How do we look at that? I don't have a specific answer of how to do that, but I do want to say that I mentioned in the slide about USAID and the tripartite collaboration, that the World Bank has an operational framework out that should be helpful for answering a question like this. And I think that might be a good place to start in looking at that and seeing how we can blur those definitive lines a little bit, at least in this space, when it comes to other fields, not necessarily health related. Um, that might be a little bit more, that might be harder to answer from my perspective at least. But I would start with looking at some existing frameworks and seeing how they do it.
Thank you. I realize that if it were an easy answer, we would have already solved it. So thank you for taking a stab at that. Much appreciated. It looks like we have another question from Sharon Tobing. And her question is, what could be the advantages to an ADRA country office to identify activities that would qualify as One Health as compared to veterinary or infectious disease, etc.? What would be the advantages?
So a lot of there is funding for things such as One Health. I know in the there is a I'm trying to think of what the name of it is. It's like a consortia of different organizations in Africa that are all about One Health, and it's really gaining traction. And being part of this it's gaining recognition, and those that are in that space are gaining recognition. And so being more intentional and involved with One Health programming could gain us recognition and visibility in a space that we might not yet have that recognition and visibility. But there's also funding available for country offices that are wanting to implement One Health programs. So those are just a couple. I don't know if that answers the question enough.
Sounds good to me. If there are any further clarifying questions or other questions, now is the time. I'm sure that Emily will be available moving forward if any further questions occur, but now would be a great time if you do have a question or a comment or a personal experience you'd like to share. The rest of the group can benefit as well.
I would
Yes, go
also
ahead.
like to tag on to answering that last question a little bit more, is that the advantage also is you get a more well-rounded approach to tackling health issues in global health as compared to just practicing from a veterinary standpoint or a human infectious disease standpoint alone. And so by having a more well-rounded approach to that, you're essentially you're helping everyone. And I know that's kind of a I don't know how to word it. That's a higher like look at it all, but it part of our mission is to, to work with to serve the most vulnerable. And by taking a One Health approach, that's really what we're getting to the root of. We're really being able to approach these problems in a way that will be more sustainable, more suitable in the long run to working with these populations that we are committed to serve. So it helps us fulfill our mission.
Excellent point. It's already part of what we want to do. We just need to engage a little more specifically. A question from Jason Brooks. In WASH, in Water, Sanitation, and Health, there is the environmental health subsector to do, there is the environmental health subsector in WASH. Do other sectors have One Health as a natural link? WASH also includes vector control and water point protection from animals. So do
Yeah.
other sectors also have One Health as a natural link?
So other sectors, as in like the animal sector, or
Maybe Jason can clarify the question. I'm going to unmute you, Jason, so you can clarify.
Yeah, I was just thinking in regards to the typical sectors that we have in our various proposals. I was thinking about community health, but we have our health, WASH, NFI sectors. We distribute things like bed nets and other things. And I was just trying to consider some of the ways that we might be able to incorporate the One Health concept under some of our existing sectors where we have these natural links.
I mean, I guess the big answer is that there is a natural link with most all of the health sectors in general, which is why this movement has gained so much steam, is because it's a natural way of looking at health in general. Specific examples of what we currently do. I'm not too involved with a lot of our projects, so I don't know that I can give a definitive answer on that, but there are links and we can certainly look into that more. I think that would be a great place to start.
Sorry about that. I had muted myself. Pointing out that the existing sectors, the existing silos, if you will, already do have that natural link is another way to help break down those barriers, to create more of a transdisciplinary.
Yeah, and that's why I tried to emphasize sort of at the end is that we have the potential there, we have the experience there already. We just need to be intentional about it.
Absolutely.
And that's the key, is recognizing that this is a thing and being intentional at looking at all spheres of the One Health approach in our programming, and not just one or two, but all of them, and see what we can do with that.
And that's an excellent segue into our final question. Just to be cognizant of the time, we'll end with this final question from Sharon, which is, I think, also something that can help inform our next steps. Actually, if we can answer that one quickly, then we can move on to another question that just came in from Yatunde. Sharon is asking, it would be great to present on what Adra is currently doing in One Health at the next international conference that you referenced that happens every 2 years. How can we find out who is already engaged, I assume within the Adra network, but may not realize that they are?
Well, we have, lucky for us, I hold a network role. And so we can easily send some of these questions out to the network and start there. Several months ago, maybe closer to a year ago, I did try to reach out to some of the regions to see what they were doing. I didn't get a whole lot of feedback at the time, but we can try that again and see, we can share this webinar with them and really show that, hey, there's interest in our industry, and this might be a space for us, and that might be a little bit more of a motivation to come forward and say, hey, we're working in this space already, let's chat. With that said, I also have some contacts from that international conference, as well as the president of the One Health Commission, who is she knows everyone that's operating in the One Health space in the US, and is very connected with many other One Health actors around the globe. And she would be a great, she might actually know of some of the things that we as ADRA are doing that we might not necessarily all know about. So we could reach out to her and her contacts as well.
So as a follow-up, again, these questions are all interconnected. Are there Yetunde asks, are there suggested ways by which ADRA supporting offices and some of our main donors to country offices can be sensitized to understanding the need for funding projects in the One Health approach?
Yeah, I think the first step would be to share the information. So having webinars like this, we can share this, we can share some documents, we can continue to have these conversations, because that's really the first step in sensitizing our own colleagues to really understanding what this is about. Not only what One Health is, but that there is like donors are interested in funding One Health projects, and continuing to put forth that message again and again is going to do something. So I think for now, sharing the information, starting with sharing this webinar, that can be a first step, and we can go from there. And if there are more questions, I'm happy to answer those. I'm happy to put you in contact with others who can answer them even better. But really just starting those conversations in our offices would be the first step.
Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciated being able to participate in this, and I know that the others on the line are also getting a lot from what you've been able to share today. As Emily has mentioned, she's happy to follow up with any further questions or clarifications, and she'll also be taking the next steps in communicating with the rest of the network, sharing this recording, as well as a little bit of the perhaps next steps that we can follow up on, both with the supporting offices and with the implementing offices. So thank you one and all. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever this happens to find you. And please do follow up with Emily with any further questions, and best of everything. Thank you again, Emily.
Thank you, Deborah.
Have a good day.
Everyone.